Welcome to today's webinar on growth. I'm Rich Wilkinson. I'm on the Solutions Engineering team here at Unanet, and I'm a GovCon guy from way back, 40 years back. I started my GovCon career as a Navy contracting officer at the Naval Air Systems Command. I was mostly writing contracts in support of anti-submarine warfare. That was a hot thing in those days. It was mostly services at first, and then some of the Navy's primary ASW hardware tools. After that, I spent 10 years with some of the area's premier GovCon firms as a controller before entering the accounting software industry. After more than 20 years in software solutions architecture, marketing, and regulatory compliance, I finally found the company and the product I was looking for in Unanet. I might actually mention Unanet several times today, but mostly we're going to talk about growth. Growth starts with a plan. It really does. And plans don't just happen. Most of all, plans require planning. That might sound trite, but I don't mean it that way. Almost 20 years ago, I was doing a demonstration of a budgeting feature in a software package when the CEO of the company I was talking to stopped me. He said, "I think you're confused. We don't want to do budgeting. We just want to have budgets." Sometimes it seems that planning is very similar. We don't really want to do planning. We just want to have a plan or plans. It doesn't work that way. Planning requires intent, requires direction, forethought, and it requires a laser focus on the objective. It's an aphorism in the GovCon industry that most mission statements for GovCon firms include the phrase, "Whatever's in the next solicitation." Now, none of us are going to turn up our noses at an opportunity just because it wasn't in the strategic plan. But opportunistic success will only take you so far. The rest of the trip requires that pesky planning thing. And that requires identifying where the growth will come from. We're going to focus on organic growth today, but there's also growth by acquisition. It requires a strategy for making it happen. And again, it requires a specific, well-defined objective. So what's on your mind? If you'll pardon the play off of another company's marketing slogan. We ask you to tell us. Today we're focused on just one aspect of this report. We're a software company, accounting software at that. So a lot of the executives we talk to are in that finance segment of the company or in operations. Plans are critical there too. A few years back, Unanet began an initiative to survey the GovCon industry for both facts and opinions on topics ranging from rates and compliance to, you guessed it, growth. We issued our first report last year. We called it the Gauge Report. It's an acronym. This is GovCon. We have to do acronyms. It's required. And it stands for Government Contract Compliance, Accounting, Utilization, Growth, and Efficiencies. We're in the process of authoring the second report even as we speak. If you haven't already downloaded last year's report, visit our website at unanet.com and grab a digital copy before we run out of electrons. And of course, we'll let you know as soon as the new report is available. We're going to focus mostly on the growth aspect of the Gauge report today. And we'll start with this. The objective of that Gauge initiative and the resulting reports is to facilitate objective decision-making for the firms we work with, as well as some insight into the issues that are front of mind for those companies. When we asked GovCon executives to identify their biggest financial challenges, it's probably no surprise, organic growth topped the list, was number one. Of course, that's just one aspect of the growth challenge, but it should be obvious that it falls in that front of mind category for a lot of people. So let's set the stage a little bit. One of the first things in planning for growth is to look at past plans. So the question is, have our prior plans achieved our objectives? And how does our growth compare to our peers? In the graph on the right, you can see some of the data that we compiled through the Gauge survey that we'll be putting in our report. This particular graph shows a description of growth across all the contractors that responded to our survey. About 16% said they were growing quickly. It's kind of interesting that 38% said they're growing steadily year to year. But then if you add together the 34 and the 12% that aren't growing at all, what that says is almost half of the industry is not performing the way they think they should. So looking at how does the growth rate compare to our peers, where do you fall in this chart? This is the current growth rate across all contractors in our survey, at least everyone who responded. The growth rate from 0 to 9% is almost half of the entire response pool. So almost half of all the companies that filled out our survey said they were growing at less than 10% a year. The other half ranged somewhere between 10 and 24 for 30% of the respondents, and between 25 and 50% for about 21% of them. Now, I have to tell you, I've been there and I've done that. When you're growing at 25 to 50% a year, or even faster, there's a certain amount of pain that comes with that level of growth, and managing that is a whole different webinar. Maybe we'll take that one up next. 30 years ago or a little more, I worked for a local company. We were doing training. We were about 35, 40 people, something like that. And we threw a proposal over the transom to an organization at NAFC, the Trident Submarine Program, to do curriculum maintenance. And we sort of messed up in reverse. We won it. And we took over the incumbent's workforce, and we went from 35 people to 400 in about a month. Now that's a growth rate that isn't even shown on this chart. It might be averaged into that blue band there somewhere. But I can tell you right now that I don't want to do that again. I would probably run screaming from the room if it happened, because there is, as I said, a certain amount of pain associated with very, very high rates of growth. And nonetheless, it can be rewarding if you do it right. Let's look back a little bit more and look at win rates. These are some of the results of our survey with respect to win rates across contractors and then compared to the prior year. Again, you'll see that a significant number of our respondents were winning 26 to 50% of all their proposals. That's a high rate. 22% fell in the third quartile, between 51 and 75%. Only a very, very few were winning 3/4 or more of everything they bid. It's kind of a aphorism, another one in this industry, that if you're winning everything you bid, you're probably not writing enough proposals. On the other hand, if you aren't winning anything, or very few, you may be shotgunning everything that's out there and not focusing to the extent you need to. It's a balance, as most things are in this industry, and that's a difficult balance to strike sometimes. Looking at the changes in win rate, that one's interesting too. Almost half of all the respondents said there was no change year over year. Now that isn't necessarily bad. If you're in the place you want to be and there's no change, that's a good thing. But I'm afraid I don't believe that to be the case for everyone. I think there's an awful lot of companies that aren't where they want to be, and they haven't been able to change that year over year. So let's look for a few minutes at tools and applications that can help with the changing things like win rates and growth rates and things like that. And it shouldn't be any surprise. I'm going to concentrate to a large extent on the far left-hand side of this graphic, the CRM and pipeline management area. The whole graphic is a representation of the data and process flows in Unanet. Every part of Unanet is focused on success for the firm and for the project, because we firmly believe in managing things from the bottom up. If every project is successful, the company will be successful too. But we believe that that success is dependent on success for the firm from pipeline management to proposals, setting the project baseline, refining the plan created in the proposal, and then adapting that plan as execution occurs and the real world begins to impose demands and constraints on the project. And then finally, Unanet gives GovCon firms unsurpassed capability to provide real-time feedback to everybody from the project managers to the C-suite and pretty much everybody in between. Let's dig into a little more detail. Starting with pipeline health and its contribution to the success of the company. Here's where, I'm sorry, excuse me. I'm trying to advance my slide and it doesn't want to move. Okay. Here's where the pipeline really contributes to the health of the company. And the pipeline health itself contributes to the company's success. The pipeline should be achievable, but not too achievable. Remember those companies that were winning everything because they weren't writing enough proposals? The pipeline has to be measurable. It should be tactical in the near term and strategic in the long term. In software marketing, we talk about a progression in the marketing space from contacts to suspects to prospects to opportunities and finally to wins. To provide a real foundation for success, a GovCon pipeline also has to address the full range from the vague possibilities of the government's long-term programs and budgets to things that are pending award, just waiting on funding, and of course, pretty much everything in between. So how do you manage that pipeline? Are you managing your pipeline? And if not, why not? The pipeline is the foundation of both the near-term plan, what we call the annual operating plan, and the long-range plans. It's the basis for revenue forecasting, and it's also the basis for resource requirements planning. Now, in Unanet, we talk about resource planning, and in the industry, there's a phrase called ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning. And there are a lot of systems out there that claim to be enterprise resource planning tools. The fact of the matter is, most of them aren't. Most of them are accounting systems. They have a little bit of capability for displaying a budget alongside a project's actuals. Some of them have an add-on module that will allow you to do a certain amount of budgeting and planning, and then import that data into the accounting system, again, to display alongside the actuals for a project. But it isn't really a process. It's just data. Data gathered in one place, shoveled over to another place, and then displayed alongside actuals. And unfortunately, For a lot of those systems, those actuals can be 2 weeks, 3 weeks old by the time the project manager sees them. And of course, the plans may or may not be as of the same time period. It's a problem. So, do you need a pipeline management tool? What are you using today? A lot of people are using pipeline management tools designed for commercial businesses with heavy emphasis on things like marketing campaigns, email distribution, lead generation. And that's great. Those have use. In fact, we use some of those kinds of tools, but GovCon companies, that's a little different. The GovCon world is not a commercial marketplace. It's the only marketplace I know of where the customer controls the timing of everything. The customer completely defines the requirements, and the customer even writes the contract. Think about the commercial world. In the commercial world, the customer doesn't write the contract. Typically, the seller writes the contract. And often the seller is offering a range of products, but it's not you define it and we'll make it for you. It's here's what we have. Which one would you like? It's a different kind of environment. So campaigns, email blasts are not something that GovCons do for the most part. Instead, we need a pipeline management tool that manages things the way our customer sees them. And that view is very different. There are some very special characteristics that a GovCon pipeline management tool needs to have. It needs real-time integration with a true enterprise resource planning system. So when that pipeline item becomes a project, it should already be there in the ERP. It needs customer relationship management for tracking the interaction with customers and contact categorization, for reference purposes. It needs workflow for action items. A lot of our clients use the workflow associated with our notes capability in our project for pipeline management. It works extraordinarily well, especially able to assign action items to specific individuals, set due dates, and track against those due dates. Pipeline management tool has to offer accessible reporting, and that means reporting that the people, the stakeholders in the pipeline can access at a moment's notice. Literally a click of a button, see it on a dashboard, display a metric that's calculated in real time. A pipeline management tool needs analytics that are an output, not a task. The analytics need to be a byproduct of performing the process of managing the pipeline and not a separate task someone has to perform on a periodic basis in order to see what's going on. And you'll see that over and over throughout Unanet, where the outputs are simply a byproduct of performing the process of doing the work and not a separate analytical task to be performed. A good pipeline tool should also give you demand planning with the ability to forecast who am I going to need and when and where. Not just for the employees that are already on the staff, but future resource requirements, what we call TBD, or to be determined resources. It needs the ability to apply a very flexible, infinitely flexible, in fact, PWIN assignment. If you're not familiar with PWIN, I know you are. PWIN is shorthand for probability of win. And in Unanet, we use that extensively in the projects area for pipeline management to assign a probability to future work so that we can do forecasts and use the PWIN weight. Of course, when we're doing forecast reporting, it's just as easy to turn the PWIN off, assume 100%, or completely exclude the pipeline and assume 0%. That's flexibility. Finally, it needs an easy transition from proposal to an executable project. The whole idea of The proposal comes out of one group, that's one item. Setting up the project can't start until the award's been made. That's an old concept. That's old thinking, old ideas. We don't do it that way anymore. Today, we manage the proposal, the win, the award, the transition to an executable project, and the communication of that win and the new assignments to employees, to workers, as a continuous process that should take place over hours, not days or weeks. Just as a couple examples, here's a snapshot of a report directly from Unanet called Pipeline by Stage. Now, this is just another view of projects, because in Unanet, everything is a project, whether it's a proposal in the pipeline, an opportunity for the future, a project being performed, an indirect pool, a pool of vacation hours for employees. All of those things are projects in Unanet, and we treat them all the same way. In this case, we've filtered the projects down to only pipeline, and we've defined the pipeline stages. I'm not sure what the definitions here are. If I was doing this from scratch, stage one for me would be an opportunity, maybe a prospect, a possible. Stage two might be an RFP on the street. Stage three might be a proposal submitted pending source selection. You could have a stage four, a stage five. These are what are called project statuses in Unanet, and they're user defined. If you need 10, you can have 10. If 2 will do you, then 2's all you'll need, and you can just create 2. And of course, down here, you'll see, as just as part of the same display, customers, and these are open. So these at one time were part of the pipeline, and they simply progressed from being a stage of the pipeline to be an open chargeable project. And that transition, minutes, not even hours, much less days or weeks, simply a change in status. When an opportunity gets to the point of becoming a proposal, that would be, for me, stage 3 of my pipeline. It's certainly still part of the pipeline, but now it's subject to more focused tracking, more focused management. And definitely, if we haven't already, and a lot of people do assign a P-win at stage 1 or 2, very low, but still there, we're going to assign a P-win that's a realistic expectation of exactly the probability of winning that job. And that's going to help with forecasting. Unanet does this as part of the native functionality of the system. P-win is part of every project, whether it's a blue sky with a P-win of 0, whether it's a project in execution of a P-win of 100, because it's actually been awarded already, or something in between in one of the intermediate stages. Everything can have a P-win. And best practice is to assign a P-win to everything. Once the celebration day arrives, and it isn't always a celebration day. You remember that proposal I told you that we won some years ago where we went from 35 employees to 400? Well, it was celebration the day we learned, and the next day it was Tylenol and aspirin because the headache started. But, you know, you take the bad along with the good. You handle the challenges the same way you handle the celebrations. When the celebration day gets here, when the award happens, Unanet can take that proposal in the pipeline and turn it into an open active project with just 2 changes. I change the status and I change it to billable. And that's it. I'm done. Presumably, the plan is already there because the plan is the proposal that was costed out in Unanet. I might need to click one button to do assignments of people in the plan. And when I do that assignment process, I click that button, the system writes assignment emails to each of the employees that are assigned to the project by task, if you did it at the task level, to say, you've been assigned to work on this project. We want it. This will now appear on your items that can be selected on your timesheet. And that makes DCAA happy, and you know we all live to make them happy, right? Of course, as soon as the project starts, maybe not day one, but certainly on day two, the real world begins to impose demands on us, on constraints on project execution. And at this point, the project plan becomes a living, breathing tool to guide progress, execution, not just with monthly reports or quarterly feedback, but on a day-to-day basis, or whatever information flow fits your organization. For some organizations, that is in fact a daily flow. I know project managers using Unanet who come in, they sit down every morning and they spend 5 minutes looking at their dashboard and this project status. Now that's meaningful in direct proportion to the workforce's compliance with timesheet rules. If people are entering their timesheets on a daily basis and all the timesheets are in as of close of business yesterday, I can click on that project this morning and see where I am. Now that might change. Somebody might move an hour off of the project they charged yesterday and put it on a different project. They might add an hour or two to a timesheet yesterday where they worked later than they thought they were going to, but it's really close. And again, for a project manager, really close as of yesterday is usually far preferable to exactly on the money 3 weeks ago. And unfortunately, that's what we give project managers an awful lot of the time with older systems. We tell them very, very precisely to the penny where they were 2 weeks ago. And as interesting as it might be, it's not terribly useful in some cases, especially today. Now, I've been doing this for a long time. I started out at NavAir in the several years back. And in those days, we would write 1-year contracts with 4 one-year options, or we would write 5-year contracts, depending on the type of money we had and how it was being released or budgeted. Today, we live on delivery orders. And the typical delivery order today is 90 days. Some of them are 30 days. There are a few that are released a year at a time, but especially the last couple of years, that's become more of an exception rather than the rule. And when you're living on 90-day delivery orders, where you were 2 weeks ago is not terribly useful. Where you are today is important. When the customer's requirements change, now you'll notice here, I didn't move the box to the right to execution, because once execution starts, that execution planning becomes a feedback loop. When those customers' requirements change, and they will, the execution and control function and the planning function become locked together in a dance. It's a real-time feedback loop, depending on how you use the system, and it keeps the project moving forward. Now, whether it's a tweak to the plan because Sally moved to the West Coast and she's no longer available, or John resigned and took another job, and those people have to be replaced, that's one level of change. The customer called and they want 6 more people and they want them in Fort Huachuca, Arizona tomorrow. That's a different level of change. I'm not going to object to that one because it's probably an increase in scope. But both of those put me into that execution planning feedback loop. If it's a significant enough change, I might need a rebaseline. And I can have versions of my plan. I can have a planning baseline. If it's a significant change, I can freeze that baseline and move to another iteration of my plan. and execute against that, measure against those plans with my actuals, whatever the change is. So how do you measure some of those things that we're interested in for feedback? We call them KPIs, key performance indicators, and there are a lot of them. In Unanet, key performance indicators can be largely user-defined. If you want to measure something that isn't measured out of the box, it's very easy to create it. You don't need Unanet's help to do it. You don't need a programmer. You don't need an analyst or a design engineer or a software architect. You might not even need your system administrator to do it. You can probably do it yourself. But even if you do need the system administrator, that's a function in your own organization, not somewhere else, not at a help desk, not at Unanet probably. It's in your own organization. So how would you pick KPIs for your projects? Well, first of all, you don't have to pick KPIs for all your projects. You can pick KPIs for project X. Project Y can have a different set of KPIs, and you can organize those KPIs into a menu of things to measure and just pick from it. Every project doesn't have to start from scratch, reinvent the wheel, whatever phrase you'd like to use there, to create KPIs. Once you've created a KPI, you can reuse it on project after project, or not if it's not useful to that project. In general, we recommend you define your KPIs by first defining the outcome. What are you looking for? And make sure that that outcome is one that actually matters to the project. Then pick a methodology to measure the progress. Identify the outcome influencers, all the factors that are going to affect whether or not that outcome is achieved or achieved successfully. And then assign responsibility for those outcomes. Finally, when are you done? How do you know when you're there? You have to define success. I can't tell you the number of KPIs or what do they call them? Quarterly goals, management by objective documents I've seen that went into great detail about picking the outcomes and picking a methodology and identifying the influencers, but they didn't define success. They didn't say, where are we done? When are we through? Finally, you set the feedback period and define the review process. Once that's done, you've got your KPI set. After you've defined your KPIs, we recommend, again, looking back at those KPIs and making sure that they fit the SMART acronym. Now, this is just one way of doing KPIs. We happen to like it. It works. We use it internally here at Unanet. We insist that our KPIs be SMART. And SMART's an acronym. Remember, this is GovCon. We have to do acronyms. It's required by law. So our KPIs are specific. They're measurable. They're attainable. They're results focused. We want to measure outcomes, not activity. I'm not interested in churn. I want to know what's been accomplished. And finally, time bound, S-M-A-R-T. The time bound creates a practical sense of urgency. It also creates a certain amount of tension between performers and objective observers. There's nothing like having a deadline to really incentivize you to get something done. I was working on these slide decks at 2 o'clock this morning. Finally, whether the KPI is at the project level, a task level, a group of projects, a division, department, office, location, some other organizational unit level, or at the company level, you can have feedback at all of those levels. And of course, at the highest level, feedback for the company. And that's often done by the finance department. It's the accounting function. It's the high-level divisional income statements or balance sheets. It's the billing and financial statements. I just finished a few hours ago, in fact, a demonstration of Unanet for a prospect down in the Hampton Roads area. And one of the comments I made was, even though we have extensive drill down capability to let you see all the data associated with what's been billed, we have a far more important capability right next to it, and that's the ability to drill down on what didn't get billed. When I worked at a very large government contractor, about 30,000 employees, a few years back, for a short period of time, thank goodness it was a short period, because it was a lot of work, I managed the billing department in the absence of the supervisor who was called away unexpectedly. We had a meeting every Friday afternoon, and all the billing managers, there were about 40 people in this billing department, just the billing department. Every Friday afternoon, the managers wanted to give me a presentation of what had been billed for the week. And it never failed. When they got through, I said, okay, now show me the important report. Show me what didn't get billed and tell me when it's going to get billed. These are some of the things that a lot of systems give short shrift. In Unanet, they're right there alongside the billable data. Whether it's unbilled or billable, you can always drill down to it and see it in excruciating detail. Now, I've talked a good bit about real time, about project managers and their desire to know where they are as of today. In the accounting world, and I am an accountant by training and at heart, we don't usually deal in real time, we deal in posted. And with Unanet, you have both aspects of the data. Accountants tend to deal in posted data, especially for things like billing and balance sheets and profit and loss statements. Project managers need to know where they are right now, and pretty close is good enough for them. For the accountants, not so much. We need to know exactly, and it needs to be posted, written, if not stone, at least in black ink, and that we can do both in Unanet simultaneously. By the way, when it comes time to define the KPIs for the organization, as opposed to a project or a task or a manager or a VP, it's the same process. You're still defining the outcomes, making sure they matter, picking a way to measure them, identify the factors that are going to influence your probability of success and the roadblocks, assign responsibility for it, define when you're going to be done, and then finally set the periodicity and define the review process. Now at the organization level, as an accountant, that's usually done for me. Periodicity, I don't have to worry about too much. It's going to be a fiscal period, whether it's a fiscal month, a calendar month, fiscal year, calendar year. And the review process is also going to be pretty much defined for me. In the accounting world, we have an advantage in that regard. We have GAAP, the generally accepted accounting practices, and those are codified for 100 years now. In the project management world, not so much. And in other areas like purchasing, not so much. Practices vary a great deal more than they do in accounting. And they're setting the KPIs for those organizations will require some additional thought about periodicity and the review process. Now I've backed up to the whole chart again from beginning to end. It wouldn't be too much of a stretch to think of the entire Unanet system, in fact, it's not a stretch at all, as a planning tool with real-time feedback. In fact, that's exactly what we had in mind when we created it. That was the original intent, and I think we've done a pretty good job with it. If you're interested, we'd love to show you some of it. live and in person. But in the meantime, let me just show you a few selected examples captured right from a live Unanet screen. This one's called resource allocation. One of the KPIs I desperately need, most companies desperately need in people-oriented organizations is who's working and how much. In this case, it looks like my Carmine user guy could use a little extra work, and it looks like Eleanor user is a little bit over assigned. Maybe I should take some of Eleanor's work and move it to Carmine and level that out a little bit. This is data that's really hard to see in most systems. It's information that you can get for an individual. I can see Sarah's utilization. I can see Mark's utilization across an organization or over a project. That's harder. In Unanet, it's simply a different way of looking at all the same data, because all the data is in one place, in one database, under the control of one application and under one security model. So I don't have to worry about, am I exposing data with an ad hoc report writer that the same person couldn't see if they were in a screen in the system. The roles are defined across the entire application with one security model for everything. Here's another report. I apologize for the tiny size. It's a lot of content. This particular one is an example of one of the project summaries. This one has a context, and that's all information is data put in context. This has a context of one line per project. So across a single line, I can see everything from the billing type, the direct cost to the indirect costs, and over at the far right-hand side, revenue, margin, and profit or loss. I don't like seeing red numbers. I do have some red numbers there to work on that. Here's another project summary. This one happens to be actuals and plans together on one report. This one's unique, as far as I know, across all the accounting systems I've ever worked with, and that's several. I've worked with most of the systems out there, especially the ones used by government contractors, and a few that aren't. This one, most systems will show you actuals on one line and the plan on another. This system is showing you actuals and plans on a single line. You might ask, how do you do that? Well, you'll notice that if you can see it, if your eyes are better than mine, beside January, I have an asterisk. In fact, I have asterisks all the way out here until I get to, let's see, this report was pulled in March. So in March, I have both an asterisk and a plus sign. The asterisk tells me that the numbers in that column are actuals. The plus sign in April and further out tells me that the data in that column are plan data. And in March, I have both an asterisk and a plus. This report was run on March 1st. So that March data is actuals through the 1st and plans for the 2nd through the end of the month. This is not only real time, it's day by day. So if I looked at this on March 15th, March would be actuals through the 15th, and it would be plans for the 16th and on, and then all the way out here at plans. And of course, in these columns, I have a total for the current period being the months that are shown to the left. Prior fiscal years, future fiscal years, I have cost to date, my actuals and my allocated budget, and then backlog. Here's what's interesting. This columnar JSR is something that project managers have been asking for, and because customers ask for it, for literally years and years, and it's very difficult to get in most systems. It's difficult to get in some systems because they're year by year, and you can only see the current year in detail. Prior years are a lump, future years are a lump. In Unanet, if I change the criteria for this report, which is the click of a couple buttons, I could have 25 columns instead of 12. or 6 columns by quarter instead of by month. If I wanted to see it by week or semi-monthly period, or even by day, if you're managing a short project and you need to manage it day by day, you could do that. It's just a matter of selecting the criteria and clicking on the button that says run. A few years ago, it's been quite a few years ago now, early 2000s, there was a huge push in DoD to require earned value management systems and earned value management reporting, EVM, on a lot of projects, especially R&D and especially large projects. In fact, DoD firmly discouraged its use for small projects because it is somewhat of an expensive discipline. It's administratively expensive to operate. But project contracting officers latched onto that requirement with both feet, both hands, because it narrowed the pool of proposals. So they started putting requirements in solicitations that said, in order to bid this job, you have to have a working earned value management proposal or system in place. Or, because FAR really restricted their ability to do that, or you have to show in your proposal a plan to install one, a timeline, tell us what software you're going to use, how you're going to operate it, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the fact is the acquisition workforce has been under workload pressure for years. And so contracting officers understandably latch onto anything that narrows the pool of bidders to a more manageable group. Your earned value management's no exception. When Unanet set out to build the financial system we're offering to the GovCon environment, we built earned value management into the system. Now, I would not try to build the next space shuttle using the earned value management system that's built into Unanet, but for pretty much everything you can think of on a smaller scale than that, it is completely adequate to produce the earned value management reporting required by the EVM standard. In fact, all 32 elements of the EVM standard are addressed with Unanet's earned value, and it's built into the system. It's not extra cost, not an optional module, doesn't require additional licensing. It does require a little bit of training and setup, but it's available on every project in the system if you're willing to put the data in to get the reports out. And that's the immutable first law of data. If you want it out, you have to put it in first. And earned value does require a little bit of data not available or not present in a lot of projects. But if you put the data in, any project in Unanet can produce earned value reports. And that gives you something that a lot of competitors don't offer. And that's the ability to say yes to that solicitation question that says, do you have an earned value management system? Yes, it's Unanet and it's built in. So we'd like to help you unlock your growth potential. We know every company out there has growth potential. We know that some of them are growing. In fact, most of them are. And over half are growing at a rate that in the commercial world would be considered quite attractive. There's an interesting function, though, or an interesting characteristic of GovCon firms. Unlike the commercial world, they don't grow at a steady rate or a smooth rate. They don't grow an employee a week or 2 employees a week. They continue project execution at 50 or 100 or 150 employees for a month or 3 months or 6 months or even a year, and then they suddenly grow by 50. It's a step function. It's not a smooth curve. So they tool along at 150 employees for another 6 months, and then they grow by 40 more. And then 3 months later, they grow by 20 more. And then they lose a contract and they shrink by 40 or 60. That's just a characteristic of how we manage in this world. So the KPIs that matter to us are different. And it's incumbent on us in the industry to define the KPIs that matter to us and that fit with our strategy. We're absolutely convinced that internal benchmarks are exceptionally valuable, but so are the external benchmarks. That's why we started the Gauge initiative. It's why we're writing the Gauge report right now. And we would encourage you, go to the website, download last year's Gauge report, take a look. By registering and downloading that last year's report, you'll be on the list to get a notification when we release this year's report. And then you can look at your own data, compare it to what you see in the Gauge report. You can look for trends in your data. You can probe deeper against those trends, questioning why are my trends different than what we're seeing across the industry. And finally, if you decide you need one, utilize an integrated real-time tool. I have one in mind. It's called Unanet, and we would love to talk to you about it. Give us a call. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to address those. Please feel free to contact us. You can reach me at rwilkinson@unanet.com. You can also go to the website and click on contact and send us a message through the website. I would also encourage you to take a look at the videos on the front page of the website. There are some outstanding short videos that'll give you an idea of how Unanet does what we claim and how it works for customers that are using it today. How about it, Jessica? Do we have any questions out there?
No, it's odd. Most of the time people have a million questions. I think you must have covered everything really well.
Either that or I put them to sleep.
I think they're still awake.
Well, thank you for joining us today. It's been my pleasure. And if we can help you, please give us a call.